Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving into a stretch of water that quite literally fuels the modern world. I'm talking about the Strait of Hormuz. It is the most vital and arguably the most volatile maritime choke point on the planet. If you've ever wondered why a single narrow channel in the Middle East has the power to send massive shockwaves through the entire global economy and honestly directly impact the price of your gas and groceries, well, you are definitely in the right place. Let's get into it. Here's a quick look at our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover the ultimate global choke point, then navigating the straits, followed by a history of conflict, the black market economy, and finally, the 2026 crisis. So, starting off with Section 1, the ultimate global choke point. To really understand the stakes here, you have to look at the sheer volume moving through these waters. Between 2023 and 2025, a massive 25% of the world's seaborne oil trade flowed directly through the Strait of Hormuz. And alongside that, 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas, or LNG. It's the absolute primary route for petroleum products heading out to Europe and Asia, and it's literally the only maritime exit for major Gulf countries like the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Iraq. But here is the crazy part. At its absolute narrowest point, this passage is a mere 21 nautical miles wide. That is a shorter distance than a standard marathon. Think about that for a second. A quarter of the entire world's seaborne oil has to somehow squeeze through this tiny, vulnerable gap that separates the coast of Iran to the north and the Musandam Peninsula of Oman to the south. And, this isn't just about fuel for our cars. It's quite literally about feeding the planet. Global agriculture relies heavily on the Persian Gulf. We're talking 30 to 35% of global urea fertilizer exports and 20 to 30% of ammonia exports. All of that passes through Hormuz. Plus, over 85% of crude exports from here go straight to major Asian economies: Japan, India, South Korea, China. To put the scale of this into perspective, based on 2018 prices, we are looking at $1.2 billion worth of oil moving through this strait every single day. Moving on to Section 2, navigating the strait. So with so many massive ships carrying such incredibly valuable cargo through such a tiny space, how do they avoid total disaster? Well, they strictly follow what's called a Traffic Separation Scheme, or TSS. Basically, it acts like a highly regulated maritime highway. You've got a 2-mile wide inbound lane, a 2-mile wide outbound lane, and a 2-mile median keeping them apart. It's incredibly strict, but the laws governing who actually has the right to drive on this highway, that is heavily disputed. And that brings us to a fundamental legal friction. Most countries, including the US, claim a universal right of transit passage based on the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, known as UNCLOS. But Iran and Oman, they view it very differently, because these shipping lanes pass right through their combined 12 nautical mile territorial waters. Both countries actually enacted laws requiring prior permission for foreign warships and nuclear-powered ships to pass through. The US doesn't recognize those claims at all, which, as you can guess, sets the stage for continuous, high-stakes geopolitical tension. Which leads us to Section 3, a history of conflict. This isn't just theoretical tension. We can trace a really sustained pattern of historical volatility here. Back in 1984, the Iran-Iraq conflict spilled right into the strait during the Tanker War, where both sides were actively attacking commercial shipping. Then, in 1988, in retaliation for Iranian naval mining, the U.S. launched Operation Praying Mantis against Iranian targets. Later that very same year, a horrible tragedy happened, when the U.S. Navy mistakenly shot down Iran Air Flight 655, a passenger jet, killing 290 people. Fast forward to 2019, and the waters were yet again rocked by tanker explosions and high-profile ship seizures. And the modern era has seen this exact same pattern just keep rolling. We've got accidental collisions like U.S. nuclear submarines bumping into other vessels in 2007 and 2009. We also see a steady pattern of Iranian vessel seizures over alleged violations, from the Marshall Islands-flagged Maersk Tigris in 2015 to a South Korean tanker grabbed for alleged pollution in 2021, and then the Portuguese-flagged MSC Ares seized in 2024. These waters are just constantly boiling with military presence and enforcement actions. Now, let's pivot a bit to Section 4, the black market economy. So, beneath all this highly regulated, heavily insured, and deeply militarized international oil trade, there is a whole other layer. The very same geography that makes this strait a global choke point also makes it an absolute smuggler's paradise. Just 50 kilometers, which is about 31 miles, separate the Omani city of Kasab from the southern coast of Iran. This super short distance means small, high-powered speedboats can rapidly cross the strait completely under the radar, literally zipping right past massive supertankers and naval warships. So what exactly is moving through the shadow economy? Pretty much everything. You've got luxury vehicles and electronics evading sanctions on their way into Iran, and then going the other way, you'll see high-powered speedboats packed with live sheep and goats heading back to Oman and the UAE. It is a really bizarre contrast. Interestingly enough, Omani authorities generally kind of tolerate this trade because it provides critical income for the isolated Kasab region, while Iranian customs officials officially fight it, citing billions of dollars in lost duties. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, the 2026 crisis. All of these factors we just talked about, the extreme global energy reliance, the legal friction, the historical tension, and those shadow networks, they all perfectly set the stage for a rapid escalation. Following U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear sites in 2025, Iran threatened a blockade. In February 2026, amidst a wider conflict and right after the assassination of Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards began limiting passage. By March 2026, the IRGC officially announced the closure of the strait, declaring any ships entering would be targeted. And by April, that led to a near-total closure and an ensuing U.S. naval blockade. Now, the consequences of this closure were heavily debated on the world stage. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, along with a ton of financial analysts, described a blockade as economic suicide for Iran itself. Why? Because Iran's economy relies entirely on the free passage of goods, and its own oil exports are strictly sea-based. So closing the strait threatened to ruin their own economy and severely strain their incredibly important energy trade with China. But despite those massive risks, the disruption happened anyway, and the immediate economic shock was just staggering. Prior to the 2026 crisis, ship insurance sat at about 0.125% of the ship's value per transit. But by March 2026, those rates spiked up 4 to 6 times their normal value, hitting 0.6%. For a very large oil tanker, that added literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in extra cost to a single voyage. The end result was an absolute freeze in global logistics. Tanker traffic simply collapsed in March 2026. Shipments were restricted by more than 90%. That equates to roughly 10 million barrels of oil per day completely halted, which sent instant, devastating shockwaves through global energy and agricultural markets worldwide. The ensuing chaos completely strangled global supply chains. In step 1, multiple cargo vessels were actually hit, and reports indicated that Iran had deployed naval mines, which halted LNG and oil exports entirely. In step 2, U.S. President Donald Trump pressured global allies to provide naval escorts. This actually revealed deep rifts, as many nations preferred diplomatic de-escalation over direct military involvement. Finally, in step 3, the U.S. implemented its own naval blockade to prevent passage. Peace negotiations in Islamabad failed, and the strait was plunged into a vicious cycle of blockades and broken ceasefires. So as we wrap up this explainer, it's clear the Strait of Hormuz isn't just a body of water. It is the most critical geographic bottleneck on Earth. Understanding its history and its extreme vulnerabilities is key to understanding the global economy itself. It leaves us with a pretty massive question to think about. As long as a quarter of all global seaborne oil relies on a volatile 21-mile wide channel, can the world economy ever truly be secure?